The first slap of rain hit my face before the second slap of his words did, and I still can't tell you which one stung worse. "An appraiser," Callum said, loud enough for the valet line to hear, loud enough for the photographers stationed outside the Vantress house founders' Gala to lift their cameras just in case. "You price dead people's jewelry for a living, Ren. Did you really think I'd marry that?" I was 27 years old, standing on marble steps in a borrowed coat, and the ring on my finger had cost $11 at a mall kiosk 3 years ago, because Callum said real stones were a scam, and I, of all people, should know a fake when I saw one. The joke used to make me laugh. It didn't anymore. "You proposed with it," I said. I was being efficient. He was already looking past me at a woman in emerald silk who was very clearly not efficient about anything. Marisol doesn't need convincing. She has better things to test than my sincerity. I am an omega. I have been one since I was 16 years old, and it announced itself in a school bathroom while my mother cried into a paper towel because she'd hoped, the way every mother hopes, that I would be spared the parts of this world that get harder for people like me. I was not spared. I learned early that the fastest way to survive being underestimated is to become very good at something quiet. For me, that was stone. Diamonds, sapphires, the tiny betrayals inside a flawed emerald. I could read a gem the way other people read a room. Nobody at that gala knew that. Nobody at that gala knew my name, either, except as the woman Callum Pierce had just finished with on the steps of the one building in this city that mattered. I pulled the ring off. It came easier than I expected. 3 years, and it slid over my knuckle like it had never meant anything at all. I threw it into the gutter. It hit the water with a sound too small for what it ended. I didn't wait to see it sink. I walked into the rain in my one good dress and let the city swallow me the way it swallows everyone who isn't rich enough to be forgiven for crying in public. What I did not see, what I would not learn for the better part of a year, was the woman in the black coat who had been standing 3 feet from that gutter the entire time, watching a stranger get discarded in the rain, and who crouched down after I'd gone and fished an $11 ring out of 6 inches of stormwater like it was the only thing worth saving on that street. I found out later her name was Ophelia Vantress. The papers had already given her a better one, the coldest heiress in the city. They called her, and they meant it as an insult. And she wore it like armor, because armor was the only inheritance her mother had ever thought to give her. I didn't know any of that yet. I only knew that my father's shop had a foreclosure notice taped to its door when I got home at 1 a.m, that my dress was ruined, and that the last $29 in my checking account would not cover both rent and the electric bill due in 9 days. I peeled off my shoes, looked at my bare hand under the bad kitchen light, and told myself the ring had never been worth grieving. I was wrong about that too, I just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks later, I stood in the back row of Halloran's auction house in a blazer that didn't fit, holding a loop I'd owned since I was 19, watching the evening go wrong in real time. Junie Okafor, who has worked the counter at Ashby's with me since we were both 22 and broke, had dragged me there under the pretense of free champagne. What she'd actually wanted was for me to stop staring at the foreclosure notice long enough to remember I had a skill worth something. The lot that night was a diamond and sapphire collar, $41 million on the reserve, cataloged as a genuine Belle Polk piece from the Vantress House archive. Genevieve Dutton, senior appraiser, and the woman who had once told me in front of 6 clients that flea market girls had no business handling estate pieces, stood at the podium and vouched for its provenance with the smooth, bored confidence of someone who had never once been wrong in a room this important. She was wrong. I saw it from the back row before the gavel even lifted, a hairline float inside the largest sapphire that no natural stone carries, a tell only someone who spent a decade squinting at flux-grown fakes under bad light would ever catch. My heart was doing something violent and stupid in my chest. Every reasonable part of me said sit down. I stood up instead. "That's synthetic," I said, not loud, just clear enough to carry. The room turned, 40 heads, then 80 eyes, then one woman near the front who did not turn at all, because she was already watching me before I opened my mouth. That was Ophelia Vantress. I didn't know it yet. I only knew there was a woman in a charcoal suit with a scent like clove smoke and cold river stone, sitting utterly still while a room full of people who mattered more than I did decided whether to laugh at me or listen. Genevieve laughed first. "I'm sorry, and you are right," I said. "Check the pavilion facet under Oeuvre. Natural sapphire fluoresces almost nothing. That one will glow like a nightlight. Someone from the house brought a lamp because $41 million buys you the courtesy of checking." The stone lit up soft and unmistakable and wrong, and the room went from a murmur to a held breath in the space of 4 seconds. I counted them. I don't know why I counted them. I just remember there were 4. Genevieve Dutton's face did something I will treasure for the rest of my life. Ophelia Vantress stood. Every head that hadn't already turned to me turned to her instead, which told me more about her than any headline ever had. She crossed the room without hurrying. She didn't need to hurry. The room hurried for her and stopped close enough that I caught the whole of her scent this time. Clove and struck stone, and underneath it, faint, something like rain on a roof no one lived under anymore. "What's your name?" she said. Not a question, a collection. "Ren Ashby. You just saved my company $400,000 in insured provenance and an international scandal, Ren Ashby." Her eyes were the flat gray of river ice in January. "Where do you work?" "A pawn shop on Delacroix Street." I said it without apologizing for it, because some invisible part of me had decided, in that lit-up second, that I was done apologizing for the only thing I was actually good at. Something moved behind her stillness. Not quite a smile. "Not anymore," she said. "Mr. Calder will call you in the morning." She turned to leave. I caught, for 1/2 second before she did, the plain silver tone band on the smallest finger of her right hand, a cheap round stone catching the auction lights wrong, and I thought, absurdly, that a woman who owned $41 million in sapphires had no earthly reason to wear something so obviously fake. I did not think about it again for 3 more weeks. I had a foreclosure notice to worry about, and a job offer that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. Vantress House occupied 11 floors of a glass tower on Kessler Row, and the workshop where Reyes Calder walked me on my first morning smelled like rosin and cold metal and money that had never once had to explain itself. Reyes was a broad, unsmiling beta who had run Ophelia's security and half her household for 15 years, and clearly considered new hires a personal insult until proven otherwise. "Don't touch the vault door," he said. "Don't call her Ophelia in front of the board. Don't be late." He looked at me like he was cataloging my flaws for later use. She doesn't hire people on instinct. Remember that. I remembered it every day for the first month, mostly because nothing about my new life matched the one I'd left. My apartment above the shop had one window and a radiator that clanked like a dying appliance. My new office had a skylight and a private security code. Genevieve Dutton, who now technically outranked me, found excuses to walk past my desk and mention my background in a tone that made the words sound like a diagnosis. I ate lunch alone for 2 weeks until Junie started smuggling me leftovers from the shop, which was how Ophelia found out, through some circuitous route I never asked about, that my father used to make a lamb and apricot stew every year on the anniversary of opening Ashby's, and that I hadn't had it since he died. 3 days later, there was a container of it in my office refrigerator with no note. I asked the kitchen staff. Nobody would tell me who'd requested the recipe. I only had to look as far as the woman who, when I thanked her for it in the elevator, said, "I don't take credit for recipes I didn't cook," which was not a denial. The foreclosure notice on Ashby's disappeared from the door the same week. My uncle called, baffled, saying some anonymous account had cleared the debt in full. I knew who. I didn't say anything, because saying it out loud felt like it would break whatever careful, wordless thing was happening between us. She started finding reasons to bring me pieces herself instead of sending them through Reyes. She'd set a loop on the table between us and let her fingers brush mine, handing it over, then act as though the contact had cost her nothing, though her scent, cold stone and clove smoke, would warm at the edges every time, the way frost gives at noon. "You look at things like you're afraid they'll disappear if you blink," she said once, watching me work. "Everything I've ever loved eventually did," I said, and then wished I hadn't, because it was true, and because she went very quiet after I said it. The tabloids ran a photo that week, Ophelia Vantress, hand resting on a museum railing, the same cheap little ring visible on her smallest finger. "The Duchess's trash ring," the headline said, because some enterprising reporter had noticed she wore it to every single gala for the better part of a year, and nobody, in a company built on 12-carat inheritances, could explain why. I looked at the photo longer than I meant to. Something about the band looked wrong in a way I couldn't place yet, the way a forged signature looks wrong before you know why. 2 weeks later, she asked me to the next one as her authenticator. +1, Reyes clarified dryly, which was the closest thing to a joke I'd heard him make. I said yes before I'd thought it through. I have wondered since whether some part of me already knew what I would see up close under Gala light, and simply wasn't ready to know it yet. The Vantress Winter Gala was the kind of room where chandeliers cost more than my father's shop, and I spent the first hour pretending I belonged in it by staying near the wall and cataloging stones on other women's throats like a nervous tick. Ophelia found me there at 9:40 p.m. I know because I'd checked my phone 40 seconds before, counting down some private anxiety I couldn't name. She held out 2 glasses of something pale and effervescent, and when I took mine, our fingers touched, and the ring on her hand caught the chandelier light directly for the first time all night. I looked at it because I am, before anything else, a woman who cannot stop looking at stones. And I stopped breathing. The scratch was there, the one on the inside curve of the band, a crude little etching a hardware store clerk had done for $11 and a smirk. W plus C. I had run my thumb over that scratch 1,000 times in 3 years, hating it a little more each time. "Where did you get that ring?" I said. Her hand went still in mine. "Ren, where did you get it?" She didn't lie. I will say that for her, always, in a year that would ask everything of both of us, she never once lied to me, not even when the truth cost her something. "A gutter on Halloran Street," she said quietly. "The night of a gala, 13 months ago. There was a woman in a torn dress who threw it away like it had never mattered, and I have never in my life seen anyone look so completely unseen. Her jaw worked once. I picked it up because I knew exactly what that felt like, and I told myself I would find her again before I let her disappear the way someone else did. The noise of the room went very far away. "You've worn it to every gala for a year," I said. "Why?" "Because the day I stop looking is the day I become my mother," she said, and I promised myself a long time ago that I would rather be cold than become that. I didn't have an answer for her. I'm not sure there was one that fit in a ballroom. I only know I stood there holding a ring's whole history in my chest, unable to say a single one of the 400 things trying to get out at once, while somewhere behind us, Isolde Kade watched the two of us from across the room with an expression I mistook, that night, for simple curiosity. I would learn what it actually was soon enough. By then, it would already be too late to stop what she'd set in motion. The vault alarm went off at 2:14 in the morning, 11 days after the gala, and by 2:19 I was standing in the archive room in borrowed slippers, watching Reyes Calder's face go the particular gray of a man about to ruin someone's life on principle. A tray of uncut sapphires was missing. The access log showed my code. I was asleep, I said. I have never once been in this room after 8 p.m. The log doesn't lie, Genevieve Dutton said, arriving with her robe cinched and her satisfaction poorly hidden, though I suppose we all knew this was a risk from the start. Ophelia arrived at 2:31. I remember because I had started counting minutes the way I once counted seconds under gala lights, a nervous arithmetic that made the fear feel smaller. She looked at the log, looked at me, and said 4 words that undid something tight in my chest. She didn't take them. The system says, "The system can be fed a false code by anyone with archive access," Ophelia said, "and I intend to find out who." She turned to me, and for one unguarded second the coldest heiress in the city looked like a woman terrified of losing something she'd only just let herself want. "You're not sleeping in the staff wing tonight." I stayed in the West residence that night, in a guest room 2 doors from hers, and neither of us slept much. Near 4 in the morning, I found her in the kitchen, sleeves pushed up, making tea she didn't drink. "Tell me to stop asking questions if you need me to," I said, sitting across from her, "but I'd like to know why a missing tray of stones frightened you more than it should have." She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. "Because 8 years ago," she said finally, "someone I loved was framed for a theft that never happened, and I believed the evidence instead of her." She left the city. I let her. Her hands were very still around the cup. I told myself I would never again choose a ledger over a person. What was her name? Iris. The word cost her something to say. I haven't said that name out loud in 6 years. I reached across the table. I didn't take her hand, I asked first, quietly, the way I'd learned she needed things asked. "Can I?" "Yes," she said, and when our hands met, her scent went warm at the edges the way it always did, clove smoke softening into something almost sweet, and I understood, with a clarity that frightened me, that I had started keeping her the way she'd started keeping that ring. The kiss that followed wasn't planned by either of us. It simply happened the way weather happens, inevitable once the pressure has built long enough. She pulled back first. "Tell me if I should stop," she said against my mouth. "Don't stop," I said, and for a little while the vault, the missing stones, and the whole cold machinery of Vantress house disappeared into something that felt, for the first time in longer than I could remember, like being entirely, unmistakably seen. We had 4 good weeks before the world came looking for its cut. I learned her in the small increments people learn each other in, that she took her coffee black and her losses privately, that she still kept a photograph of her mother turned face down in a drawer, that underneath the etiquette column composure was a woman who purred, low and helpless. When I traced the old scar along her collarbone from a car accident that had killed her father when she was 19 and left her running an empire before she'd finished grieving one. "Your mother taught you love was a liability?" I said one night, tracing the scar. "Who taught her that?" her mother, Ophelia, said. "It runs in the family like a bad hip." She caught my hand before I could pull it back. I used to think control was the same thing as strength. It took an omega with $11 worth of nerve to teach me those aren't the same word. I told her about my father, about the year he died, and the shop nearly went under, and I said yes to Callum because he was steady and dull and safety felt at the time, like the only kind of love I could still afford. I told her about the lamb and apricot stew, and she admitted, finally, that she'd tracked down the recipe by calling every deli within 6 blocks of Ashby's until one of them remembered my father by name. "You remember everything," I said. "I remember everything about you," she said. "It's the only inventory I've ever wanted to keep." We were still laughing about that, softly, foolishly, the kind of laugh that belongs only to two people who have just discovered they are safe with each other, when Reyes knocked on the door at 11:52 p.m. with a folder in his hand and an expression that told me the warmth was about to end. "You need to see this," he said. "Both of you." Now, the story broke online at 6 a.m. Forged documents claiming Wren Ashby had fabricated her gemology credentials, that Ashby's pawn shop had a decade-long history of laundering stolen goods, that I had orchestrated the missing sapphire tray myself to discredit a rival appraiser and seize her position. Every document had a signature. Every signature was mine, badly copied. The board called an emergency session by 9. By noon, 3 members were demanding Ophelia terminate me on the spot to protect the company's public offering, scheduled in 6 weeks. Isolde Cade sat at the head of that argument with the calm, sorrowful face of a woman who hated having to say such difficult things about someone she'd only ever wished well. "I'm not firing her," Ophelia said, in a boardroom that had gone very cold. "I'm finding whoever did this." "You're compromised," Isolde said gently. "Everyone can see it. It isn't a crime to want someone, Ophelia. It's a crime to let wanting her cost this company its offering." I watched something close behind Ophelia's eyes, the shutters of the Coldest Heiress in the city coming down in real time, and understood with a sick, plummeting certainty that 14 years of doctrine doesn't unlearn itself in 6 weeks, no matter how much stew and how many kisses you stack against it. "Take a leave of absence," she told me that night, not looking at me. "Until the board settles. It's the only way to." "Say it," I said. "Say you're choosing the company. I'm trying to protect you. You're doing exactly what you swore you'd never do again." My voice broke on the word again, and I hated that it did. "You're choosing the ledger." I packed a bag in 20 minutes. Junie let me sleep on her couch without asking a single question, which is its own kind of love, and I lay awake, staring at her ceiling fan, thinking about a discarded ring in a gutter, and how thoroughly, completely, I had just become it. It took me 6 days to stop crying long enough to get angry, and anger, it turns out, is a far more useful engine for a gemologist than grief ever was. I went back through my own memory, stone by stone. The tray reported missing had never existed in any inventory record older than 14 months. I found the discrepancy at 1 a.m. On Junie's kitchen table, 3 cans of energy drink deep, cross-referencing insurance certificates against acquisition dates that didn't line up. Isolde Cade had been swapping real inventory for synthetic stones for 8 years, laundering the difference through a shell auction house in Geneva, and the first person to ever get close enough to notice the pattern had been a young omega gemologist named Iris Calloway, who Isolde had framed and driven out of the city before she could finish the sentence she'd started. I called Emmerich Voss, the house's oldest master cutter, who had quietly hated Isolde for a decade and had the archive access to prove it. Between the two of us and 41 hours without real sleep, we built a paper trail even a hostile board couldn't argue with. I brought it to Ophelia myself, not because I'd forgiven the leave of absence conversation. I hadn't, not yet. But because some things matter more than being right about a fight. She read 4 pages standing in her own doorway and went the color of old paper. 8 years, she said. Iris didn't steal anything. I let her leave, believing she had. We can still fix that part, I said. The other part's on Isolde now. We confronted her together at 7 p.m. in the archive room where it had all started, Reyes standing near the door like a man who'd been waiting years for this exact evening. Isolde didn't bother denying it once the ledgers were on the table. She simply smiled, cold and unbothered, and said, "You'll ruin the company's reputation exposing this. Better to let me resign quietly." "No," Ophelia said, and for one terrible second her hand closed hard enough on the desk edge that the wood groaned, the coldest heiress in the city looking, finally, like she might become something colder still. "Don't," I said, "just that." My hand on her arm. Let her lose everything the legal way. That's worse for a woman like her than anything either of us could do with our hands. Ophelia's fingers unclenched slowly, like something thawing against its own instinct. "Call the board," she told Reyes, "and the police." Tonight, Isolde's calm finally cracked. "You'll regret choosing her over this company." "I already regretted choosing the company over her once," Ophelia said. "I only get to make that mistake one time." The board called an emergency press conference 9 days later, in the same auction hall where I'd first stood up in the back row and ruined Genevieve Dutton's evening. This time, I stood at the front. Ophelia played the recordings herself, Isolde's own voice confirming the Geneva Shell Company, the doctored signatures, the frame job that had chased Iris Calloway out of the city 8 years earlier. The room that had once laughed at a flea market girl in a borrowed blazer sat in absolute silence as the truth landed piece by piece. Isolde was escorted out in handcuffs at 2:47 p.m. I know the time because I counted every second of it, the way I'd once counted 4 seconds of a sapphire glowing wrong under of light, because some victories deserve to be measured exactly. Genevieve Dutton resigned within the week, her authority quietly, permanently spent the moment the board realized whose judgment they should have trusted from the start. Callum's engagement to Marisol dissolved 2 months later when his own embezzlement at a separate firm came to light, a small, unrelated cruelty catching up to a man who had specialized in small, unrelated cruelties his whole life. Iris Calloway came back to the city for the hearing. She was steady and married now, kind in a tired way, and she found me afterward in the corridor. "You're the one who cleared my name," she said. "Ophelia told me everything you did. You don't owe me anything," I said. "No," she agreed, "but I'll say this for free. I have never, in 8 years, seen her look at anyone the way she looks at you." She smiled, and it wasn't bitter, just something closer to relief. "Take care of her. She's better at protecting people than being protected." Ophelia found me on the steps outside as the crowd thinned, the same steps where a year and change ago I'd thrown $11 of cheap metal into a gutter and walked away certain I was worth exactly that much. "Tell me to stop if you need me to," she said, low, and knelt down right there on the marble in front of everyone who had once sneered at me. "Ask me with your words if this is what you want, because I will not do this without hearing you say it." "I want it," I said. I have wanted it since a woman in a charcoal suit asked me my name like it was the only thing worth collecting in the room. She said it plainly, the way she said everything that mattered, no flourish, just fact, delivered like a verdict she'd finally earned the right to hand down. "Then, marry me. Bond with me. Let me spend everything I have left proving I will never again choose a ledger over you." The bite came later that night, in private, after the kind of slow, whispered permission that made it feel less like claiming and more like coming home. "Tell me to stop," she murmured against my throat, and I answered the only way I had left in me. "Don't stop." We married in the spring in the small stone chapel behind the Vantress estate, with Reyes standing gruff and suspiciously misty-eyed as her witness and Junie sobbing openly as mine. Emmerich Voss reset the old scratched band himself, not replacing the stone, but setting it, humbly, beside a new one on the same slender chain. So the cheap ring that had once been thrown into a gutter now hung directly over Ophelia's heart every day for the rest of her life. In 15 years, Reyes told the small gathered crowd, raising his glass with the stiff formality of a man unused to sentiment, I have never once seen this woman wait for anyone. She waited a year in the rain for this one. I'd call that proof enough. A year to the exact week after I'd stood on those gutter-lined steps believing myself unworthy of being kept, Ashby's reopened under a new sign. Ashby and Vantress, fine appraisal, with Junie running the counter and Genevieve Dutton's old reputation replaced, gladly, by mine. Callum sent one bitter, unanswered email that I deleted without reading past the subject line. Isolde Cade's trial ended in a sentence long enough that her name stopped appearing anywhere that mattered. On our first anniversary, I woke before dawn to morning light falling flat and gold across the bed, and found Ophelia already watching me the way she used to watch stones under a lamp, like she was checking, one more time, that nothing about me was fake. My hand found hers on the sheet between us, my new ring catching the light, her old one warm against her chest where it had rested every single day since the night she pulled it from 6 inches of storm water and decided a discarded thing was worth keeping after all. I used to believe that what was thrown away stayed thrown away, that a woman like me could be priced once and marked down forever. I was wrong. Some things aren't worthless just because someone once let them fall. They are only waiting for the right hands to reach into the water and decide, quietly and completely, that they are worth keeping. The end.